right place. Otherwise, you may want to go back into the main group to go to another breakout room. All right, well, I'm going to get started. Thank you all for coming today. We also have around in the group Shalini Sen, who is another service planner with the MBTA. Sorry if you joined a little late. I'm Josh Weiland. I'm a service planner with the MBTA, as is Shalini. And then we have Doug Johnson, who is the project manager for the Bus Network Redesign project. And I believe we have Ben Eskin as a note taker as well. So the way that we're going to be doing this is I'm going to be going through all the changes since the last session, or since the last map came out back in the spring. If you have questions, we're going to be doing it through chat. If you are on a computer or a smartphone, so you'll be able to use the chat button to submit a typed question. We ask that you ask one question at a time. You can ask multiple if you would like at different different chats. And you should send it directly to the person named Ask a Question. If you send it to me, I won't see it, and so won't be able to answer it. And the person named Ask a Question will end up asking me those questions, and we'll be able to go through them. If you've joined by phone only, by calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and then we will allow you to speak, and then mute you so that we can answer the questions. So first, just going to go through kind of non-map changes quickly. So there are a lot of routes that did not change since the May proposal, all those ones that you can see on the screen. There were several that the map did not change, but the frequency and span did. So for example, the 34E is now extended to go until 1 a.m. The 52 has been changed to a weekday only service. The 504 added midday service, and the SL2 was promoted to high frequency service 7 days a week. One thing that I wanted to go over, because we've had a lot of questions about it, and this is not a change in the proposal from the spring, but one that I felt could be better explained, because we haven't been able to help people understand our proposal. There is no desire, and I want to be completely clear about this, there's no desire to use First Street to Summer Street all the time on the T7 in South Boston. So as you can see here, there's what we do right now because the demand is overwhelming coming from City Point going to the Seaport and downtown. Right now in the mornings, we run a direct bus from Summer Street to City Point Terminal, and then going inbound, it circles around on East Broadway. The proposal is to do exactly the same thing, except to move it over to Farragut from P Street. That would mean that it would be, the reason to get it off of P Street is that there's kind of trouble with if there's trash or if there's double parking and that kind of thing. It is a much easier road and gets less backed up on Farragut. Likewise, in the PM, it's actually exactly the same because we use Farragut now. So currently from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., we run the outbound on Broadway to City Point and then go back in on Summer. It would be exactly the same in the proposed service. And in off-peak, it would be both directions on East Broadway, just as of today, and on Saturdays, and notably on Sundays. Part of this proposal is to run it on Sundays as well. So I hope that makes people feel a little bit better about this proposal. I personally, this is my bus, so I hope that this makes people feel a little bit better about that. Going into the things that have changed since the spring, we have the Route 11. We've heard that the connection to the Boston Medical Center is important for folks in South Boston. So we're extending the 11 to Nealon Street, which will provide the two-way service to the New England Medical Center. Route 12 we heard that accessing the BMC was important, so we adjusted some routes to go through there. For the T12, this means it'll run on Mass Ave rather than on Melnia Cass. We also heard that accessing Nubian was important, so we're proposing to do that. So that means that it would hit the orange line at Roxbury Crossing rather than Ruggles, because it has to go down on Washington Street by way of Nubian. Likewise, a desire to access the center of BMC on the 8th, so we moved it from going all the way down Albany to go on Concord and Newton, as many of the buses do through the hospital area now. And same thing on the 42, we moved it from going all the way down Albany to Concord and Newton streets, internal to the hospital area. For the T15, we had proposed all the way from Oak Square to Fields Corner as a high frequency route. One of the major concerns we heard from operators was the length of some of the routes, and this is one of the examples that was commonly cited. It has a one-way length of about 85 minutes, or running time of about 85 minutes. So that was considered a little bit too long for our operators to be able to sit through. So the Route 65 corridor on its own doesn't appear to have the demand in terms of origin destination for high frequency service. So therefore we reduced the proposed frequency for the Route 85 half from high to medium frequency, and we kept the 15 from Fields Corner to Ruggles. The 65 does now come in to Ruggles in a way that it didn't before. We've had proposed to have the 19 run on Humboldt, but we heard significant desire to have a direct connection between Fields Corner and Warren Street. So we've reestablished the 19 along Warren Street. But that means that we no longer would have that service on Humboldt Ave. So we've reestablished much of Route 44, though only from Jackson to Nubian. And there are many connections over from Nubian to Roxbury Crossing and Ruggles that can make that last bit of the connection. We also heard a desire to restore the routing of the 14 to Roslindale to Nubian Square. So we've reestablished that, and part of the change from the spring is that the routing will be on Warren Street instead of Blue Hill Ave as we had proposed. So this new version of the 14, however, does not run to Heath Street, but we heard a lot of desire to serve that corridor, especially to Nubian and the BMC. So we're proposing a version of the 41 that connects to Heath Street to Nubian to BMC to JFK. The current 41 routing into Jamaica Plain will be provided by Route 38, which we had already proposed back in the spring. Again, because we're proposing to move the 14 back to Warren, that section of Blue Hill and Dudley would not be served by that. So we're proposing to reestablish the Route 45 to serve that corridor. There was a desire to reestablish Route 17, especially to main service on Boston Street, which had been eliminated in the spring version of this map. So we have reestablished that service. Route 18, in the draft map, we took Dot Ave straight through Dorchester, and we're now restoring direct service to Fields Corner Station and front door service to the elderly housing on Auckland Street, rather than staying on Dot Ave a block away from that. For Route T39 in the spring, this was a proposal to combine 39 and 47 as a new crosstown route from Forest Hills to Cambridge and Somerville. This again was a very long route that brought some pause to our operations staff, and we heard a lot of feedback that desired the existing routing of the 39, so we've restored that here. In order to maintain some of the northern end of the T39, we are creating an version of the existing Route 47 as a high frequency route, the T47. We heard a lot of people also talk about wanting the connection between Cambridge and Ruggles, particularly for access to Northeastern. So this hopefully helps satisfy that desire. It doesn't do the connection to Porter that had been proposed in the spring, largely due to concerns we have about space having so many routes end at Porter. Therefore, we're proposing to end it at Union Square, providing a crosstown connection to the Green Line. We got a lot of comments requesting the existing 55, which has been restored here. As we do so, we've created a new version of Route 85, which runs from Ruggles through the LMA to Kendall and on into Somerville. And this is that complete route up to Assembly. For Route 29, feedback was that the Franklin Field Apartments folks wanted the connection to the Orange Line at Jackson Square rather than the direct connection to Ashmont. So we are restoring that service. Note that it would be only as a midday service. West of Ashmont, we had proposed to make a straight route from Mattapan to Fields Corner, but people had pushed back against that, desiring the existing 26 routing. So we have moved back to that. And those are the changes. So again, you should be able to use the chat button to submit a typed question to the person who's named Ask the Question. And if you send it to me, I won't see it, unfortunately. And if you have joined by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing the star button and then star button and then 9. And after that, we'll lower your hand and you'll be muted to allow us to respond. So I believe Doug is going to read us some questions, which Shalini and I will do our best to answer.
Thanks, Josh. Yep, there are some questions coming in. Folks, if you have questions, please keep sending them as a direct message in the chat to our project team member who has renamed themselves Ask a Question. There were a couple of questions about Bus Network Redesign sort of generally, which I'm happy to answer right now, but will also be addressed back in the main session when we go back to the main room for Q&A. So one of the questions was, where will we focus implementation in those early years? We are looking to focus implementation in places that don't currently have high frequency service. So Everett, parts of Chelsea, parts of Medford and Malden are areas that we are taking a really close look at, but we will be looking at changes across the network in each phase. The actual sequencing of changes is going to be very dependent on the bus operator headcount every year and how much it increases. So in earlier years, we may focus more on capital projects. Those are basically construction projects where we need to make modifications to streets in order to make some of these services as frequent and reliable as we want them to be. Someone asked if we can share the slides. These slides are in the recording of the presentation from November 2nd. So we haven't posted the slides themselves yet, but you can go see the recording of this breakout room on the project website. You can also look at the interactive map. We can post I will grab a link to that and post a link to it in the chat so that folks can look at the interactive map. So bear with me for one moment. I am going to message everyone. Let's see. All right, everyone, this entire meeting just received a message with a link to the interactive map. You can go to that and look at the network on that map if you'd like. But back to questions.
Sorry, Doug, before, will this meeting be posted also online? Because they're slightly different slides. Will there be a way for them to get access to this? this also?
Yes, great question. So we did post the recording of the main session and all the breakout rooms from the November 2nd meeting, and we will also post the recordings from this meeting, both the main session and the individual breakout rooms. So if you don't have the opportunity to go check out a different breakout room, you can watch the recording of all of them on the project website. There was a question about the letter T in front of route numbers, and that's something that I meant to clarify in the main presentation. Right now, we are denoting the really high frequency routes with the letter T in front of them. Josh, you might go into an example of one in this slide deck. We actually didn't end up changing most of the high frequency routes from what we had proposed, so we don't go through all of them in this deck, but you can see two of them here. So routes that are that highest frequency, that's every 15 minutes or better, 7 days a week, we put the letter T in front of them to denote that. When we actually go to implement this whole network, we will likely have a different naming convention for all of the routes across the network. We're figuring out a plan for that right now, including the messaging and the communications around all these route changes. But for now, for the planning purposes of this network, the letter T in front of a route number denotes that that route is going to be every 15 minutes or better, 7 days a week. Let me keep looking at questions here. Sorry, 1 second. Someone said, thank you for clarifying the 7 and that it will stay on Broadway, because that was something that, as Josh said, we hadn't changed. It was just the way that it was shown on our interactive map was not exactly expressing what we intended to do for it. There was a question about the Route 10. That route, I think we'll have to switch to the interactive map in order to show that. So we can go back and forth between the slides that we have and the interactive map if folks.
Can you see that or no?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, do you mind talking about what this route will do?
So the idea for the 10 is, okay, I'm just not seeing my screen up there, but that's fine. So the idea for the 10 is that it somewhat flips ends with the 8, actually, the T8. Just to show that quickly, whereas the 10 before had come from South Boston through the BMC up into Back Bay, it flip ends with the 8 and now goes from South Boston through South Bay Mall, through the BMC and over to Ruggles. And that would be, looks like we're currently planning about 25 minute, every 25 minutes on that for most of the day. And it would be a all-day service.
Great, thanks, Josh. Can you go back to the Route 44 and talk about what the 44 will do again?
Do I have this in order at all? I don't know if it's not in the 44. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. So the plan for the 44 is, 1 second. Yeah, so the 44 is proposed to go from Jackson Square to Nubian by way of, I guess it's Columbus and Seaver and
Humboldt Ave.
And Humboldt Ave, and then up onto Warren, up to Nubian.
Yeah, so somebody asked, they wanted to clarify if this was going to Ruggles. So the 44, the part of it that we put back in the network does not go all the way to Ruggles. As Josh mentioned, it goes to Nubian, but then there are a number of buses that do make the connection from Ruggles Nubian. So as well as go from Nubian to many other locations. So folks would be able to transfer at Nubian in order to get many other places in the network.
As well as from Jackson to Ruggles.
Yes. And do you mind talking about the 47 again?
I have to flip through these. I did this in a logical way rather than by numbers, but okay, so the proposed 47 is much of the existing route from Central Square over to Ruggles. It does not continue on through BMC over to South Boston, but it is extended to the north to go up past Union Square in Somerville. And this is proposed as one of those T high frequency routes.
So it will not go to Broadway as it does today, but there are a number of buses that folks would be able to transfer to in order to make that connection to the Red Line.
Right, and I know people may be concerned about the connection between, let's say, the LMA and Broadway, and we'd point to, say, for example, the 12, which is going through South Boston and going all the way over to that area.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. To the person who asked about the 34 and 34E, we don't specifically cover that route in this presentation, but that route, there are slides for that route, and it will be discussed in breakout room number 7. So if you, in order to get into that room, you'd have to click the breakout rooms button and then go back to the main session and then go and join room 7. And folks will be able to talk about the 34 and 34E there and answer any questions that you have. Somebody asked about high frequency services. So Josh, unfortunately, many of the questions that we're getting are just general bus network redesign questions. So I'm happy to field those. Somebody asked, how will high frequency service work? They note that many frequent routes today get stuck in traffic, and they had a question about monitoring or dispatching affecting bus bunching, which is when multiple buses get stuck behind each other rather than being on a regular interval, like when you get 3 in a row and then none for a really long period of time when they're supposed to be every 5 or every 10 minutes. So, excuse me. Bus lanes and bus signals are going to be a really important part of this effort and being able to make routes more reliable. As that person correctly noted, and as you all know as bus riders, many of our routes get really bogged down in traffic. And even if a route is supposed to come every 5 minutes, that schedule won't hold if traffic gets really bad and buses are just sitting in traffic. So the goal is to implement a lot more transit priority throughout the network, especially in those places where we know buses really get stuck. So we've analyzed where buses are getting stuck in traffic the most, those most congested locations, and where we would need bus priority, things like bus lanes or transit signal priority. That's where a bus is coming up to a green light, and the bus can signal to the light to stay green for a little bit longer to let the bus go through. Or in some cases, if a bus comes up to a red light, it can trigger the light to turn green sooner than it normally would to let the bus through. So we're looking at all of the locations in the network where we would want that kind of infrastructure in place. And we will be implementing measures like that across the network over this 5-year period in order to improve reliability for buses and address that congestion issue. There was a question about when riders will be informed of these changes. So every year when we go to make changes to the network, we will notify people well ahead of time of what the changes are. There'll be a communications plan or an outreach plan to inform folks well ahead of time before the changes are actually made, so that it won't come as a surprise to anyone. So there will be extensive communications and outreach about that. There was a question, let's see. Keep going through these. Can you talk about the 14, Josh? Go over that again.
Yeah. So the 14, oops. So on the 14, again, we heard a desire to restore the routing from Roslindale to Nubian. Part of that in the spring we had run on Blue Hill and on Dudley, and there was a desire to bring it back to Warren Street as well, kind of like the existing service. And so just quickly, in order to cover the areas that were had been part of the 14, existing 14 runs to Heath Street. So we heard a desire to serve that corridor, especially to Nubian and BMC. So we're proposing a version of the 41 to do that, to connect over to the BMC and JFK. And because we're proposing to move the 14 back to Warren, we're proposing to reestablish the 45 to serve the Blue Hill Dudley Street corridor.
Thanks, Josh. And so somebody asked about the 14 serving Boston Latin Academy for folks from Roslindale. So it will continue to do that as it does today. That will be unchanged.
Yeah, this does not show all of the supplemental service that we have as kind of one-off or four-off or whatever trips. This is a little bit more broad brush than that, but we're not planning on stranding folks like that.
Yeah. There was a question, someone asked why the 43 was the only bus that goes to Beacon Hill. So there's a few reasons for that. It's real. One is that it is very difficult to run bus services on really narrow streets with really steep grades. So Beacon Hill has obviously a lot of very narrow, steep streets that would not be suitable for bus service. It is also very well covered by the rapid transit network. So there's the Charles MGH Red Line station and the Park Street station just to the south of it. And then, as folks know, there's also an effort underway to connect the Blue Line to the Red Line at Charles MGH. So for many folks in Back Bay or going to Back Bay, the rapid transit network is going to provide a more reliable and more frequent service than most bus routes would be able to, just because of the roadway conditions around there. So that's the main reason why, the main reasons why there aren't more bus services in that area specifically. In terms of the frequency of the 43, the 43, when we created this network, one of the things that we did was we looked at travel patterns throughout the region where people were going to and from. We have basically all of the travel data for the trips made throughout the region by any mode of transportation, not just by bus or by transit, but by driving, walking, and biking. So we have all that information on all of the travel throughout the region. And what we tried to do is make sure that the high frequency routes and medium frequency routes were lined up with where that travel demand exists, so that the bus service would match that demand. There are some other routes, smaller local circulator routes or sort of neighborhood routes that are still important for them to exist, but they don't necessarily have the demand to support the really high frequency that some of these other routes do. So in the case of the 43, while I can't speak specifically to the demand on that route, we made decisions about the amount of service on routes based on the demand that we saw or the existing ridership on routes. Josh, can you talk about the Route 50? Might have to switch to the remix map for that one.
Shalini, are you on the line? Are you able to talk about this a little bit? I am not as familiar with this area of town.
Shalini, if you weren't able to unmute yourself, you should be able to now. But if not, we can come back to that question. All right, let me keep going down the list. Someone asked if the MBTA trip planner tool will be updated when new bus routes are implemented. Yes, they will. Yes, it will. The trip planner will continue to be updated as routes are modified. So we anticipate that route modifications would take place annually, sort of as a package of changes. So when those would go into place, the trip planner would be updated. All of our materials like maps that show the network, any information about the bus network would be updated at the same time to have current information about the network when those changes affect. So that will be updated whenever changes go into effect. Somebody asked us to identify the streets that buses will run on. If you have, to the person who asked that question, if you have a specific route that you'd like us to walk through, please let us know. And we're happy that we can zoom in on this map and talk about each specific route that a bus will be operating on. I know at certain scales it's hard to see or it doesn't necessarily label routes. There was a question about the Route 55, suggesting that during Red Sox games and events at Fenway Park, if the 55 could be extended to later in the evening than what is shown on this map. That's a really great question. So I will say there is a planning effort underway by the city of Boston that's looking at the Kenmore and Fenway area. So we expect that planning process will make recommendations about transit service in the area. And it's possible that recommendations that come out of that process could potentially be incorporated into the future bus network. So I don't know the exact timeline on that planning process. I believe it is underway now, and they typically take about a year or so. And I apologize that I don't have that information on hand. But I know that the city of Boston is taking a close look at the Fenway area and what the impacts of big events at Fenway Park are on traffic and travel in the area. So the MBTA is a participant in that planning process. We coordinate with the city of Boston on a pretty continuous basis. We have like monthly standing meetings with them to talk about services and ongoing efforts in addition to all the other meetings that we have with them. So we're involved in that process, and I anticipate that some recommendations would eventually come out of that for issues in Fenway. Somebody asked if frequency changes are taken into account for Boston public school students. I want to reiterate a point that Josh made earlier, in that the MBTA currently runs special school trips in some locations, and those are not reflected in this map, but it is our intention to continue to run special school trips as we do today. But those are not shown here, unfortunately.
Shalini, are you
Yes,
with us now?
I'm ready.
Thank you.
Can you go to the 50?
Yep.
So the 50 used to go from Forest Hills to Hyde Park via Washington Street and the Clarendon Hills area. But now it's going to be extended to Fairmont Hills, and as well as go all the way up to Walcott Square. And that used to be served by the current existing 24, 27. So that's what the difference is now. We're extending it all the way up to Walcott Square from Hyde Park. Not along Hyde Park, but on the Fairmont Hills residential area.
Thank you, Shalini.
We also, Shalini, this may be for you as well. We have a question about the routing for the 36. Could we walk through the 36 for folks?
Okay, the 36 used to go all the way to the VA hospital, and there used to be a branch that goes all the way to Millennium Park. And I think somebody's asking about the archives. And we are not going to be serving the archives because it's a short walk from the VA hospital to the archives, but it would be extended to the Dedham Mall along VFW Parkway.
Thank you, Shalini.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just going through a lot of questions that are still coming in. There was a question about the 55 going to Downtown Crossing rather than Copley or Downtown Crossing as it used to do. In the main network, we had proposed something pretty different for the 55. We were going to have the 55 go from, it was going to go from the LMA, Josh is showing it here, over to Kendall. But based on the feedback that we got from folks, we ultimately decided to put it back to what it is doing today. Josh, if you could go to the revised network. This is what it is doing today, which is not exactly the same as what it did pre-pandemic. It used to go to Downtown Crossing. Ultimately, with restoring this route, to what it does today, we decided that in order to balance our resources, we would continue to have it do what it does today rather than go to Downtown Crossing, partly because of the number of transit services that are available to make the connection to other parts of downtown. I know that transfers can be difficult for many riders, but this is a location that would be or is accessible. So we are going to have the route continue to do what it does today, with folks being able to transfer to other services in order to get to other locations downtown, including Downtown Crossing. There's also a question about A Street. Sorry for not getting to your question earlier. So the Route 11 today, Josh, you can highlight the Route 11. The Route 11 today, as folks know, loops through downtown. So it goes from South Boston over to Tufts Medical Center, loops through downtown, and then comes back on A Street. So it provides one-way service on A Street and then returns back to South Boston. Something that we really tried to avoid doing in the new network was having routes make large loops or do different things in different places, and as opposed to always doing the same thing consistently and providing the same service in both directions. So when you have a really big loop like that, it really reduces the frequency of the route for folks on any particular leg of that loop. If you were on A Street and you were using the service, you wouldn't be able to use the service to get northbound into downtown, right? You would only have it in one direction. So by removing those large loops, we're able to provide really more consistent service on the portion of the route that we are continuing to serve. We know that there is development in the pipeline along A Street. The city of Boston and the MBTA have been meeting about Bus Network Redesign and speaking specifically about A Street and what the future of that corridor holds. We're continuing to have conversations with them. For now, what you see here for the 11 is what we intend to move forward with. But we're continuing to have conversations with the city of Boston about what the future of A Street looks like, and the potential for having a different bus service on it in the future, depending on the status of different development projects that are slated for that corridor. The person who asked that question also asked if 4/10 of a mile, if we consider that acceptable for getting to a transit service. So it really varies by location, the walk distance to a stop that is acceptable to folks. And in this case, with A Street in this area, it's a very flat area. There isn't challenging topography, and there's access to the red line. There's also going to be the high frequency T7 on Summer Street, as well as other services connecting from Broadway to other parts of the network. So yes, for folks on A Street, there would be a walk required to get to those services, but that walk, I wouldn't anticipate is going to pose a barrier to folks accessing the network like it would in other places where there is really challenging topography, and therefore we needed to make sure we shortened those walk distances. Josh, can you bring up the 50 again? There was a question clarifying whether at what time of day the service would run to. And it's difficult for me to see the.
Oh yeah, this is saying from on weekdays from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Every 25 minutes, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every 50 minutes, then from 4 to 7 every 25 again, and then for the rest of until 10 o'clock every 90 minutes.
So the 50 would run until 10 o'clock on weekdays.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. Someone just asked us to clarify that.
And also till 10 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday.
And also to 10 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. Yes, that's a big feature of this network, is that there is significantly more service on Saturdays and Sundays than there is today in the network. As folks know, many routes today have very low frequency on Saturdays, and in some cases no frequency on Sundays, or no service, I mean, or just much less service on either of those days. So one of the goals of this effort was to make sure that routes had consistent service 7 days a week, to the extent possible. So many of these routes will get much better service on Saturdays and Sundays. I'm just looking back at the list of questions here that are coming in. I'm scrolling through. If folks have additional questions, I encourage you to post them in the chat. We still have 12 minutes left, so I will say for folks, you are also welcome to go to other breakout rooms if you'd like to see what's being presented in those rooms. If you have questions about routes that we didn't cover in this session, you certainly can go to other breakout rooms and see the presentations there. But we're also happy to continue to take questions here.
And just to reiterate, we're doing questions through the chat. So if anyone has any questions, you can send your question to the person named Ask a Question in the chat, and Doug will be able to read it out to us. Alternatively, if you've joined by phone, you could raise your hand by pressing *9.
Yeah, and when we go back to the main session, there'll be a general Q&A where folks will be able to ask questions verbally if they'd like. So there was a question about the 38 that I realized I missed earlier. Of course, I now have to go back and find it. Scrolling through the list is not easy. So I apologize for that. Where was the question about the 38? Josh, can you bring up the remix map and show us the route?
Yep. And I think this might be a Shalini one as well.
I can handle that. So the 38 used to go from Wren Street up Center Street, past Jamaica Plain Center to Forest Hills. But now it will be continuing on Center Street all the way up to Jackson Station, which is like a combination of the 38 and the 41. And then it'll continue on to Nubians.
Thank you, Shalini.
Mm-hmm.
There's in addition to that question, can you also show the 39?
Is that a T? Yep.
Yeah. So the 39, the T39 is going to be, it already is a pretty frequent route, right? As folks who use it know. It's going to be every 15 minutes or better, 7 days a week. So the transfer from the 38 to the 39, if you're connecting to the 39, should be pretty seamless because of the frequency of the 39. It's going to come frequently enough that if you're getting off of the 38, a 39 will arrive pretty quickly for you to transfer to. In terms of the amenities at stops, whether like where shelters are located and other kind of amenities at stops, that is something that we're looking at as part of this effort. So we want to make sure that all bus stops in the system are accessible. Obviously, right now, not all stops are accessible. That's something that there are actually multiple efforts underway to make bus stops throughout the network accessible. So any new transfer location between bus services, we will make sure is accessible. We're also looking at what kind of amenities are available at stops, whether there's bus shelters or benches, what kind of signage and lighting are provided in those locations, because we want, if folks are transferring from one service to another, we want them to have as many amenities as possible to make that transfer the most pleasant experience it can be. That includes providing, real-time information at stops. One thing that we've been doing throughout the network is installing e-ink signs at many stops. They're sort of like Kindle ebook readers, basically, but they list the routes that arrive at that stop and when they are arriving. So they provide real-time information, just like in a transit station on the subway line. So by providing that information at stops, it makes it a lot better for folks who are trying to transfer between services. When you get off one bus, you can look at that and see when your next bus is arriving. Of course, cell phones, if you're using Google Maps, often has real-time travel or real-time information for bus locations as well. So folks can use that. But for transferring to a high frequency service, it should be relatively seamless, since the bus will arrive very frequently. Let's see, what other questions do we have? There was a question about buses circulating through busways at subway stations. That is something that we're looking at as well. We are conducting analysis of layover space and routing through stations as well. It's the term for buses pulling into a station. It's called berthing. So that we are looking at berthing analyses and transfers at transit stations. The person asking this question asked or mentioned that at certain locations like Ruggles and Jackson Square, sometimes buses can take a really long time to get through those busways. So that is something that we're looking at as well. There was a question that just came in about if ventilation, air filtration, and other health improvements are planned to improve workplace safety for bus drivers and the public. I can say that there is a plan underway to reconstruct or modernize all of the bus maintenance facilities. That's necessary in order to also electrify the entire bus fleet. So there is an effort underway. The North Quincy garage is the first one in line to be replaced. There's an effort underway to build a brand new bus garage in Quincy. It will expand the capacity of the MBTA for the number of buses that we can have. It will allow us to begin procuring battery electric buses as well. So there is this effort underway to modernize all of the bus facilities. So that directly relates to workplace safety and workplace conditions for our bus operators. For the buses specifically, I unfortunately don't have any information about the ventilation capabilities on buses, or if that would change with the procurement of battery electric buses in the future. So sorry that I don't have that information on hand. Let's see. If you have additional questions, we ask that you post them in the chat. Josh, can you talk about the Route 21 and tell us the frequency on that route?
Shalini, are you familiar with this route?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
So the 21 from Forest Hills to Ashmont, we are basically not having any changes other than upping the frequency a little better. It's going to run from 5 to midnight, past midnight, and there will be a 12-minute 12-minute frequency from 6 to 9, 20 from 9 to 4, and 4 to 7 and 12 minutes on weekdays. And after that, it'll be 20-minute headway all the way to midnight. And Saturday and Sunday will be 20 minutes every 20 minutes all day long. Same type of 5 to midnight service on the weekend.
To 1 a.m. actually.
1 a.m. Okay.
Yeah. And it's the same route as today, right, Shalini?
Correct. No change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. We also had a question about cashless only payments on the MBTA. I don't have any information to share at this meeting about the fare transformation effort, but there is a process underway called Fare Transformation that is looking at changing the way that the MBTA collects fares on all modes, whether it's bus, transit, or commuter rail. So unfortunately, while I don't have any information specifically about that effort to share at this meeting, I encourage you, there's a project website for fare transformation. So I encourage you to check out that website. There's information there about that effort, including timeline for implementing a new fare collection technology across the T. Let me just, in the 30 seconds that we have left, try to check for additional questions. We did receive many comments from folks, so if you put a comment in the chat, thank you. We did record that. And I didn't read it out if it was a comment and not a question, because I just wanted to answer questions for folks. But we did take in all of the comments that folks submitted through the chat. So that will be part of the record of this meeting, and we'll log those with all of the other comments that we've received from folks. But all right, it looks like we'll be going back to the main room momentarily. And thank you all very much for joining.